I like that move of Keanu Hill to the tight end position, and it's not something that we've spoken about very much. I know I have not. When Aaron Roderick announced the move in spring camp, instantly I thought that makes a ton of sense. I think that's phenomenal. Welcome on into the Third Down Analysis podcast. Today we're going to continue the BYU Opponent Preview series by going through the Arizona Wildcats. I've gone through Kansas State and Baylor and continuing to work through BYU's Big 12 opponents one by one in the order in which they play. And then I'm also going to pivot for a minute and talk about the tight end position, specifically Keanu Hill, because I think there's a reason for optimism at that position. So let's dive right in here. And what I'm going to do is, as I've been doing in these presentations, they basically are presentations, but in these opponent previews, I'm going to bring up on screen here for those of you who, there we go. All right, those of you on video, you'll be able to see my screen, and then on podcast audio, I'll do my best to walk you through. So the Wildcats, let me walk you through here real quickly their historical record. So something to call out here is last year they won 10 games, 9 games in the season, but 10 games overall because they got that bowl win against Oklahoma in the Alamo Bowl. And if you look here at their historical record, I think what stands out is that 10-win season was the first 10-win season they've had since 2014, and it's only the second 10-win season that they've had in the last 20 years. And even as recent as 21 and 20, Arizona won a total of 1 game between those 2 seasons. They won 5 in 2022. So Jedfish had them moving in absolutely the right direction. But prior to that, they were a mediocre team. You could see a lot of 8-5 seasons in the history. And then more recently, under the late era of Rich Rodriguez and under Kevin Sumlin, they never got above 7 wins. So this program, what's interesting if you think about Arizona is a year ago this time, the only reason we were talking about Arizona was because they were coming into the Big 12, and that was primarily because they've got a phenomenal basketball program. We didn't really talk much about their football program at all. So I think that's fascinating because now they're in a new world where suddenly, hey, they have a really good year. They got a great quarterback and receiver, and they're receiving quite a bit of notice as a program that could make some noise in the Big 12. So we'll see if they do. And some key stories that I want to highlight here today when I look at the 30,000 foot view of the program is that this program is going through a lot of change. We'll dive into a little bit about that, but coaching changes. So if you've been following, you know that Jedfish left to Washington. If you haven't, now you know. They bring in Brent Brennan from San Jose State. I went up and down the coaching roster, and that entire thing, almost the entire thing, shifted quite a bit at all the position and coordinator coaches. So we'll walk through those in a little more detail. Also, clearly, they're heading into the new conference, Big 12. They lost 28 players to the transfer portal. So when your coach leaves, many of you may know this, but when your coach leaves, you've got, I think it's 30 days where you've got a free transfer. And so Arizona lost 28 players. A chunk of them went to Washington, but not all. And then they brought in 24 players from the portal. They also brought in 16 high school recruits. So Arizona brings in 40 new guys. They turn over a third of their roster about, and that's a little more than the typical team. So we don't know if they're going to be a Louisville or a TCU, Louisville from last year or a TCU from 2022, where a first-year head coach is able to work the portal and gets the team to a conference championship game, or are they going to struggle? And I think that's going to be one of 2 stories this year is they're going to have to recruit. Blaine Fowler hit this well on BYU TV Sports Nation a few weeks back, but Arizona's going to have to scout 8 new teams on their schedule. We'll show you here in a minute on their schedule. And then they're going to be installing new offense, new defense, a ton of new players. So they're going to be going through a lot of new change. I think that, to me, I actually think that leads to more difficulty that they're going to face I think they're a good team. I think they'll be even better in the next couple of years. But when you're doing everything new for the first time, it's hard to do those things really well unless and I would advise Brendan to do this, unless you simplify everything, base defense, base offense, and simply execute extremely well at a high level. But even that takes time and that takes coaching. So we'll see. The second big story here is Noah Fifita and T-Mac are back. Noah Fifita is their quarterback. Tetairoa McMillan is their receiver. I'll go through them again in more detail, but I've got some statistics on them that I think are interesting. And then the third story here, I think, as it relates to BYU, is that when I look up and down BYU's schedule, they've got the difficult teams in the Big 12. They've got Kansas State, Oklahoma State, Arizona, Utah, Kansas. I think that barring any kind of significant injuries to any of those teams, I think this is the most gettable game for BYU. They're going to be coming off of a bye when they play Arizona, and they've got the Wildcats at home. And because of those changes that I mentioned in the first key storyline here, I think this is going to be one of those games where if BYU can avoid giving up the big play to Fifita and T-Mac and find a way to generate offense, I think it's going to be a dogfight, and I think they've got a chance to be in that game. And if they can get it to the fourth quarter within a score, then who knows what could happen. So Arizona, a quick preview of their schedule this year. I think they're going to go 8-4, finish 6th in the Big 12. You can see I think they'll go 2-1 in their non-con, which Kansas State actually qualifies as a non-con this year because that game was scheduled before Arizona moved into the Big 12. And so Arizona comes out with a pretty difficult schedule for the first, not the first two games, but then you got at Kansas State, you got a bye, and then you got at Utah. I have those both as losses. I think that's going to be tough. Fortunately for Arizona, then, they've got the next stretch of the schedule is not as difficult because they've got 3 of those at home. So they've got Texas Tech at home, which I think is good for them. Short road trip up to BYU. It's going to be a difficult match, but there you go. Colorado is a team that they have played, but they get them at home. And then they get West Virginia at home, which I think is going to be big. Now, then you'll see the back third of the schedule at UCF versus Houston, at TCU versus Arizona State. It's not the most difficult stretch, but why would I have 2 losses there? Where I think the UCF game, that's at the end of a 6-game slate. We're without a bye. And traveling across the country, again, new opponent. I think UCF is going to be good this year in that 7-8 game range. So I think that's more of a scheduling loss. If that was in Tucson, I'd put that at Arizona. And then you've got the game at TCU. Again, it's difficult on the road, new venue, but Arizona and Houston and Arizona State should be victories. So here's a quick glance at the coaching changes. Basically, everyone's changed. The one thing I'll call out here is the defensive coordinator, Dwayne Akina. He was at Arizona from 87 to 2000 under Dick Tomey. So he's been there before. He was also there last year, but he was more of an analyst, and he was coaching the safeties and the DBs. So he steps up to defensive coordinator. So of all these different guys here, he's the only one that was on the staff last year. Brent Brennan does have ties to Arizona as well. He did coach under Dick Tomey. He was a GA in 2000. Couple notes about him. So he was at San Jose State for 7 years, and he was the first San Jose State coach to have back-to-back winning seasons since the early 90s. And he did this the last 2 years in 22 and 23. He was also the Mountain West Coach of the Year in 2020. They went 7-1, and they were the conference champions. He's a former wide receiver, so he's got that offensive mindset. And then the rest of the coaches, a good chunk of them came with him from San Jose State. Dino Babers, the offensive coordinator there, you can see he was recently the head coach at Syracuse, just barely. And he wants to run a fast offense. And then they also have the linebacker special team. I thought this was interesting. They bring in Danny Gonzalez, who was also most recently the head coach at New Mexico. So a talented coaching roster. But again, that's a lot to put together in one season. So we'll see how it goes. Now, point differential, I like showing this. If you've been following, you've seen this graph before. But Arizona, in the new Big 12, they would have had the second best point differential last year. 162 points scored more than they gave up. Second best in the Big 12. BYU was fourth worst at -81. As far as high school recruiting, Arizona's been, the last few years, they've been starting to average a high 3-star athlete. I think you can see that's the pickup from Jed Fish there in 22, 23, and then Brent Brennan was able to keep what Jed Fish had going by sustaining that at a .87. Now, for those on audio here, what I'm showing is 24/7 Sports average player rating. And there's a lot of different ways you can look at this, but this way in particular, I'm just looking at the average player rating. So it doesn't account for volume of players. It doesn't account for if you've got 5 players that are a 95 and you've got 1 player that's a 25, which doesn't exist. But if you did, right, then that average would be brought down by that 25. But nonetheless, I still think this is a good, useful way to see that. And when you compare them to the rest of the Big 12, they're actually fairly mediocre. The 86, 87 rating that they've been getting the last few years, that's a good, solid player. They definitely have P4 talent, but they're not. They're right there in the middle of the Big 12 in terms of recruiting. All right. Now, when you look at the offense, so I'm going to jump into the offensive preview here. I'm going to pull up some stats here as well as I go through this. So the 3 key stories: first, can they repeat their offensive success from a year ago? They were a really good offense. Again, Noah Fifita and T-Mac are the big story here for the offense. And then the third is, well, how can BYU slow down that Wildcat offense? And we'll look at some different areas. What I'm going to pull up here on screen is actually a couple of metrics here that I found to be interesting. So when you look at the total points per game last year, Arizona was 25th in total points. They averaged just over 34 points. Of note, BYU was 98th. They averaged 23 points per game. So that's about 11-point spread there between the two. I also noted San Jose State and Syracuse because that's where the head coach and the offensive coordinators are coming from. So San Jose State was 31st in the country at 33 points a game. Syracuse was 81st in the country with 25 points a game. So I don't know exactly how that offense is going to meld, but I do think that is something to watch. And then the total yards per game, you've got Arizona at 19th best in the country. So they were fairly not as balanced like as Kansas State we saw a couple of weeks ago, but Arizona 300 yards passing a game, 150 yards rushing per game. So again, 19th best in the country, 453 yards. So this is what I mean as far as their offensive success from a year ago. And then offensive success rate, if you've been listening, you've been hearing what I've been describing. This is essentially the ability for the offense to stay on schedule. So if you're getting 5% over 5 yards on your first down and over 70% of the yards to go on second down, so that you're getting to the point where you have a 3rd and short, like a 3rd and 1, 3rd and 2, those type of situations, or you're getting the first down on your second down, right? And then, or if you get to 3rd down, you're getting that 3rd down, you're getting that first down. So it's the ability to be consistent. And you can see here, Arizona was 6th best in the country last year, which I find fascinating. They had a 51% offensive success rate, and they were pretty even in terms of their passing and rushing success rate. Passing was 51.5, rushing was 52.16. So the BYU was 124th in the country. They were not as good, so they were at a 36% offensive success rate. On opposite ends of the spectrum there in terms of the offense, and that's what I mean is can Arizona repeat this? Now they bring back their quarterbacks, but they did lose an offensive tackle, a tight end, and a wide receiver that were all drafted. They only return about 10% of their rushing production. So 90% of their rushing yards last year is gone. And then in terms of their receiving production, about 40% of that is accounted for in Tetaroa McMillan, and he's back. So look for them to be look for them to early on to see how they're progressing. Okay, now here's a little bit of a profile I've been putting together on the quarterbacks, and Noah Fifita. You can see here where he stacks up. He was 40th in the country last year in passing yards, which you'll see here in a minute. That actually, I'll just show you real quick. He didn't play the entire season in terms of as being the starter. You can see he got in on most of the games. In that top left graph, you can see he had passing yards in most of the games, but it wasn't until the game 5 against Washington, when he throws for over 200 yards, that he's finally starting to get starter level reps, and so he was on pace. He was on pace to get over 3,000 yards in the year had he been the starter all year. He was also 16th best completion percentage, which I think is something to watch. He only had 6 interceptions, 25 touchdowns, so a good TD to interception ratio, and he completes a high percentage of his passes. So he's an efficient guy. Now I've got some information here on his explosive plays. So explosive passing play is any play that's over 15 yards from it's a 15-yard passing play or more. And you can see here on screen here that he had 9 explosive passing plays that happened on 1st and 10. So, and which is actually when most of his explosive passing plays occurred. He had 6 on 3rd down, and he had 4 on 2nd down. So that'll be something to watch. Is 1st and 10? Is he going to go try to find T-Mac somewhere? And I may eventually post these somewhere out on in a visible way down later in the season. But you can see here. He was getting 1 to 2 explosive passing plays per week. Against Arizona State, he had 4. Washington State, he had 4. And then a couple other things here. He was on his explosive passing plays. He was averaging 27.6 yards per throw. He also had 4 that were over 40 yards. So what does this tell me? That's a lot of statistics there that I just threw at you. What does that mean? That means that when BYU is defending, they're going to have to. They can't let T-Mac and Noah Fifita beat them on the long play, because otherwise that's going to BYU's not going to be able to recover from that. Now I wanted to jump to T-Mac for a second, and apparently that's what they call him, which is why I keep calling him that. But what I wanted to show you here was he was 19th best in the country in terms of the volume of explosive passing plays. So he caught 20 explosive passing plays for a total of 550 yards. And he had, let's see if I can get to that graph here. He had 1,402 yards last year. So he had 90 receptions. A third of his yards came on explosive passing plays. And he had, it was close to, I would call it like 15% of his receptions were explosive passing plays. So what that tells me is, and you can see 15 yards per reception. He was the best receiver in the new Big 12 last year. I mean, by a mile in terms of yards and everything else. He was, of those who are coming back, I should say, he was really good. So how does BYU slow down this Wildcat offense? I think there's a couple things that they can do here. Is one, they're going to have to figure out how to generate pressure. I'll show you in a minute, but BYU was literally the worst last year in sacks. They weren't great in pressure rate, so they're going to have to figure out how to generate pressure to make Noah Fifita uncomfortable. Second, they're going to need to generate turnovers. Arizona had a neutral turnover margin, so
it was something like they I want to say it was about 13 turnovers. It was somewhere between 7 or 13 turnovers that they gave up, and they generated the same amount. So they're not generating a ton of turnovers, but they're not giving the ball up a ton either. Well, BYU generated, it was the second or third most turnovers in the Big 12 last year, and they're going to need to do the same thing, at least in this game. And then another thought I had is I think you make other people beat you, so you double cover T-Mac, you try to take him out of the game, and then will all of the change that Arizona is experiencing on the offensive side of the ball with new players, new schemes, if you can get Fifita uncomfortable and take away T-Mac, then you, at that point, you're banking on the fact that he's going to have to look to others, and BYU is hoping that they haven't developed enough chemistry at that point, which, okay, 5-6 games in the season, maybe they have, but I think that's one way that you could approach that. Now, for the defense here, 3 key storylines is that one, we mentioned the coaching and the player turnover. 12 of their 24 transfers were on the defense, so half of their guys they brought in were defense from the transfer portal, and most of that were DBs, defensive linemen, and well, actually, safeties, cornerbacks, and defensive line were most of that chunk there, because that's most of what they lost. So that's why I'm talking about. I'm going to talk about here in the offense in a minute is, can BYU get traction on the ground? And Arizona does have a couple of cornerbacks returning that they feel are really good, but their defensive coordinator Akina, he coached them last year, so we'll see what happens there. Now, the second point again is similar to that first. With the offense, can they repeat what they did defensively last year? Well, what did they do? So they were 31st in the country in sacks. So they were 31st in the country in sacks, or 35th last year in the country in sacks. They had 31, and compare that to BYU with 11. They were, as far as tackles for loss, they were 64th in the country. They had 69. So that's fine, but defensive success rate, they were a little bit above average, so pretty good. They were 56th in the country, 41% defensive success rate. For you to kind of give a gauge of how good is that? Well, Penn State, arguably the best defense in the country last year, they were at 29.5% defensive success rate, so about 12 points worse was Arizona. Utah was best in the Big 12 last year, 35.8. BYU was, let's see, they are up here. Where do I go? Oh, right there. I had them highlighted. BYU was 90th best, so they had a 43% defensive success rate. So not too far off of Arizona, but there are a lot of people right there in the middle. Defensive passing success rate, Arizona was better in that area, so 48th in the country at 39%. But rushing, they were 71st or 72nd at 43% in terms of rushing success rate. And BYU was actually a little bit better. BYU was 57th in the country. So this is where I'm saying Arizona is replacing a lot on their defensive line, and new scheme. We're hoping that BYU's offensive line is better. So can they get some traction on the ground? A couple other metrics here. Defensive havoc rate for the front seven here. You can see that Arizona was 40th in the country, so last year they were pretty good at generating pass breakups and getting pressures. And then from the defensive backside, this is what I was talking about earlier with BYU actually being pretty good at the cornerback position. They were 45th in the country at the defensive back havoc rate, while Arizona was 53rd. So Arizona, what this is all telling me is that Arizona was a solid defense. They weren't the best defense out there, but they were a little bit above average. And again, like I was saying with BYU, something else that BYU did was that they were actually good at the explosive passing play, but Arizona was also good at defending the explosive passing play, which I've got right here on screen. So Arizona last year, their defense gave up 48 explosive passing plays for just under 1,200 yards. BYU was pretty good. They gave up 50 for just under 1,300 yards. So I think a team whichever team is able to generate more explosive passing plays, I think that is going to be a key contributor to that team winning. I want to talk now for a minute about BYU's tight end position and specifically Keanu Hill. So I like that move of Keanu Hill to the tight end position, and it's not something that we've spoken about very much. I know I have not. When Aaron Roderick announced the move in spring camp, instantly I thought that makes a ton of sense. I think that's phenomenal. So last year, I've got on screen here the Big 12 receiving from teams last year, the new Big 12, I should say. And Isaac Rex, he was, let's see, I don't have the rank in here, but he was about 35th in the conference in terms of total yards receiving. He was the 8th or 9th best tight end, but we all know what he can do. So he's gone now. There are a lot of capable bodies behind him, but not a lot of experience. So you slot over Keanu Hill. I think that's a brilliant move. I like the move for 3 reasons specifically. One is the position fit. I always thought that Keanu Hill was a really capable all-conference type at the G5 level, or if you're running a really heavy independent schedule with not a lot of P5. He's really strong. He's got good height, but he's not I don't think he's the fastest receiver out there. And that showed up this year. He did have some injuries this year, but you have to look quite a ways down the line to see that, okay, last year, 1 touchdown, 187 yards, 12 receptions. Not his best year. Again, I think he struggled with some injuries, but all of the BYU receivers last year struggled with getting separation, and that was something that I noted in my previous podcast there. But when you move Keanu Hill over to the tight end position, now suddenly you've got his speed, which he's got, as a tight end now, he's got good speed, and his height and his strength are good enough at that position. He's also one of the best skill position blockers on the team. I know the coaches have really talked about that in relation to his blocking ability. So he can play. He can play every down. I also like that for a second reason is the creativity that you can get now at the tight end position. So I think that what you have is you've got guys like Jackson Bowers, Ray Paolo, Ethan Erickson, Mata Vatase, Reiner Swanson. I mean, there's a ton of guys there. Mason Fakahua. A lot of guys that I don't know exactly who's going to end up getting the time, but you could run 2 guys in a set, 1 on each side of the center, in on the line for run formation, or for you could send one or both out on the passing. You could split Keanu out as a receiver, or you could split one of the other tight ends out as a receiver and keep Keanu on the line. And then from there, whether Keanu is out for a pass or he's blocking, you could stack 2 of the tight ends next to each other, and from there you could send both out for a pass. You could keep both in. You could send one out immediately, one out on a delay. You send only one out. And so there's a lot of creativity that I think increases the complexity that the other team needs to scout for. Now, the third reason why I like that move is that it gives more opportunity at the receiver position for BYU's talented receivers. That's arguably BYU's strongest position group, and so now you get more receptions going across to a deeper pool of people while you still have the opportunity for a high quality guy in Keanu Hill to be on the field. all the time, essentially, as a tight end. Now, quick glance into Keanu Hill's receptions over the last 5 years. So you can see on screen here, Hill went from 3 receptions in 2020 to 4 in 2020, or that was 2019. 3 receptions, 40 yards. To 2020, he had 4 receptions, 1 touchdown, 70 yards. And then 21, he's 18 receptions, 2 touchdowns, 343 yards. 22 was his best year, 36 receptions. So he doubled his receptions. He more than tripled his TDs. He went from 2 to 7. And in terms of yards, in 21, he went 343. At 22, he went 572. So he had a bit of a drop off in 2023. But I expect him to really come back strong this next year. I think he's going to have a positive season. I think he's a good. I think BYU fans have a real opportunity to be optimistic about him, and so love to hear what you think. Love any feedback, any thoughts. I forgot about my pun, and so I'm going to share that real quickly because I heard a great one from a BYU speech, and it connects to the Olympics. If you may remember, the Olympic gold skier Peekaboo Street, she gold medalist. May I say gold skier? Olympic skier, gold medalist Peekaboo Street, heard that after the Olympics she wanted to go work in an ICU so that when she answered the phone she could say, hello Peekaboo ICU. So anyways, I think that is hilarious. So thanks for listening in. Share, feedback, anything you've got, love to hear it. It goes a long ways to share, but more importantly is to provide any feedback that you've got, what you like, what you don't like, what you'd like to see more of. Thanks. Have a wonderful day.